Hello, and welcome to another episode of Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. I'm your host, Amanda, and my amazing co-host is...
Hello, I'm Megan.
Hey. All right, so we are your source for messy, imperfect homeschool advice. Now, notice we didn't say crappy homeschool advice. We just don't pretend to be perfect. We live in the real world where the laundry really, really needs to be dealt with. There are never enough hours in the day. You own 72 pencils, and yet none of them are sharpened, and they don't have erasers. And I'm telling you, if I step on one more freaking Lego, it is going to get ugly. I mean, very, very ugly. All of that to say, we're real people, and we are never going to show up here and pretend otherwise.
Okay, so I was laughing so hard when you were rattling off examples of real life kerfuffles, because the example that instantly popped into my head was years ago, but when my youngest child got stuck to a giant rodent trap while we were at an appointment. And I was not ever really super familiar with sticky rodent traps before. The glue on those things is like I think they could assemble spaceships that go into outer space with the glue that is on those things. It is bananas. So yeah, I'm not exactly oozing perfection over here, but years later, we are still laughing about it. And I will say my homeschool game is strong, if I do say so myself, even if my kid got stuck to a rodent trap.
Yeah, I can generally attest to the fact that getting stuck in a rat trap is not a metaphor for his overall education. Maybe just, a Tuesday.
Yeah, in our world, yes.
But besides mishaps that require, I assume, an entire bottle of Goo Gone to fix,
Yeah.
the other thing that you can expect here at Homeschool Moms Unfiltered are secular and progressive values. We kicked off 2026 with a whole "Do you hear the people sing" battle cry. And our first couple of episodes of the season, we were really pissed off and angry. You probably picked up on those vibes if you listened. But now we're starting to realize that every week is just going to be, what fresh hell is this? And is this actually my handbasket? And there's not much we can do with that. We're going to continue probably to discover new depths of anger with a healthy dose of despair, because welcome to 2026 as United States citizens.
Yeah. So since our last recording, Renee Nicole Good was shot and killed in Minnesota. And if that wasn't infuriating enough, we've since then had to listen to government quote unquote leaders lie about it for the last week and then watch people defend their bullshit with statements like, well, if she had just complied. I mean, that has the same energy as like, well, what was she wearing or how much did she have to drink? And it's like, enough with that bullshit. So we are learning that there are no depths to the lack of humanity. Even Victor Hugo might struggle to come up with some words that could later be turned into a musical for this shit show. Like it's bad, right?
Well, yeah. And can I just say, we are fully aware of the fact that this absolute nonsense has been happening to Black and brown people by ICE and law enforcement, and it's not right. Like there's no world in which it's right. I think it's especially infuriating in this case because it was exactly what all of the Trump supporters were like, but they would never a U.S. citizen, and they would never a this, and they would, and all of it. And it's right there in your face with all of the videos. And somehow they're still able to be like, but, and
yeah, agreed, right? Agreed. So if you are horrified by the state of our crumbling democracy and beyond pissed off that public schools in Minnesota needed to be closed to protect American children from the American federal government, then you are in a safe space because we are right there with you. But today we shall aim to serve as a small distraction from the state of the world with a topic that we are really looking forward to unpacking together. I think it's going to be good.
Yeah. So here's the deal. We are currently reading the book How to Raise Kids Who Aren't Assholes, and we'll talk about that more later, I'm sure. But in the early chapters, the author talks about grit. And so we were in our book club meeting, and it kind of this idea of grit came up. And then when we're talking about grit, we're talking about like the ability to stick with something when it gets hard or boring or uncomfortable, right? So, in other words, when you reach that moment where something stops being fun and you don't immediately bail, right? That's grit, or at least that's how we're defining it for this episode.
And that is probably a good quality to have and is probably necessary to varying degrees in one's life. But it did get us wondering how that aligns with homeschooling. We've done a gazillion and one episodes here at Homeschool Moms Unfiltered where we've talked about customizing your child's education to their needs and their learning styles. We've talked about changing things up, adapting, differentiating. And those are all good things too. And some of the qualities that make homeschooling amazing are those things. But the big question then becomes, how do we balance that amazing personalized learning experience while also making sure that our kids have whatever degree of grit is determined that they will need when they launch into the world at large? And when I say world at large, homeschoolers are out in the world. They are out in the world interacting with other humans often, but we mean launching as fully formed, fledged adults. So,
Yeah. I mean, that's it, right? There's a big difference between being in the world as a kid, and there's a big difference with being in the world as like a college student. A lot of people say that that's like the transition, like the bridge into adult life. And at some point, all kids have to join the adult grown up world in some fashion, manner, or capacity. So we're going to be exploring grit today. First, before we do that, we do try to begin every episode with a general weekly recap, part of that whole keeping it real. We're not influencers. We have rodent trap confessions. So, yeah. How's your week going, Megan?
true story. Well, today's an exciting day. Today marks 1 week since I started the process of trying to open bank accounts for my two oldest kids here in Portugal, and I'm still not done.
Hmm?
In my adult life, we have purchased many, many houses because we've moved a lot for my husband's job. And so there's been a lot of buying and selling. I feel like the amount of paperwork that I've had to submit so that my kids could get a checking account with a debit card, all they want to do is be able to tap their debit card to get on the metro, order some chicken tenders with friends at McDonald's with their debit card. I mean, they're not financing international terrorism here. I'm certain of that. I had to provide birth certificates. I had to bring my marriage license to the bank today. You name it, they have it. They know everything they could possibly know about me. I'm hoping against hope tomorrow's the day. I submitted like another 25 pages of documents today, and I feel like that's the batch that's going to do it. So we're going to see. I shall keep you posted. Beyond that, just stress about the state of the world. So much so that last week I was having trouble chewing on my left side. And I have always had oodles of dental issues due to eating disorder type issues and et cetera, that my teeth are not in the greatest of shape. And I'm petrified of the dentist on a level that's like, I would rather give birth on a live stream and like let people fish around in there than go to the dentist. I hate it on every level. And so I was like, oh my God, please don't tell me I have a cavity and I'm going to have to go to the dentist. This is terrible. And then I started thinking, well, maybe it's my period. Because sometimes do your teeth ever get like sensitive or like your gums bleed more? Like sometimes before your
Yeah.
period, sometimes I get some of those things. And so I was like, maybe it's my period. And then I realized, no, it was just sleeping at night. My jaw was so tight that my poor molars were like being crushed into my gums. So I've really been working on relaxing before bed and trying to manage that a little bit. And I can now chew on the left side. It's still sore, but I can chew a little bit. So there you go. But I mean, I'm on social media all day for work stuff and always engaging with other homeschoolers. And it's literally to the point that when I see a video of a dark street and a big horde of people, I have to read the description to see if it's Tehran or Minneapolis. That's where we've ended up now. And to your point from before, it was like all these people telling us, you're overreacting, you're overreacting. And yeah, no, we weren't. We were never overreacting, FYI. But yeah, I sent my oldest kiddo off to Canada yesterday, which is exciting. His birthday is, as of when we're recording, his birthday is tomorrow, which is crazy because when he comes back, he's going to be a whole ass grown up, which is like so weird. I can't even believe he's going to be a grown up. So we had a little surprise party for him last weekend. And when I say surprise party, it was me, his siblings, and my parents. But my mom made his favorite dinner. And then I ordered the whole buffet of tiramisu because that's his favorite dessert. And because he's not going to be here for his actual birthday, but he's going to be off hanging out with camp friends. If you're not familiar, not back to school camp, we get no money from them, but it's awesome. And so he's going to go hang out with a bunch of camp friends and do his thing and celebrate his birthday. And then he's playing Pokemon this weekend in Toronto. There's a huge Pokemon tournament this weekend. So it'll be a good weekend for him. So anyway, what's new with you, Amanda?
Yeah. I swore that I was going to take the first few weeks of January off, but I've still definitely been busy because that's just how that works. There's no getting around it. We're well into January, definitely in the second half of January, and I still haven't put my Christmas presents away. So I should probably work on that. I still haven't made Christmas cookies. I'm going to get the Christmas cookies done. They might be like Valentine's Day cookies at this rate, but we'll see. I still haven't washed all of our laundry from our trip to Bali back in November. So there's that. Life is just a fucking mess. Right before we sat down to record, I was trying to help my kiddo. We're slowly easing back into school. We started back this week, just mainly doing like math, science, and history. Although in fairness, our history is pretty literature heavy, and kiddo was reading like 3 or 4 novels, actual novels a week for history. So I think that probably counts as ELA, although that's not our ELA curriculum. But we are catching up on all of the things. So math this week was just a lot of review worksheets of the unit that he's been working on and art of problem solving and just making sure that he hadn't forgotten stuff since we have really done very little in the last month. And science was the same. It was this week he was supposed to wrap up the first semester of physics that he's doing with Science Mom and do the final whole assessment. And he did it, and then we were reviewing it, and there was a lot of, what is the equation for force? And why didn't we use that equation to solve this problem? I would think that if it wants to know what the force is, it would be a good idea to use the force equation. Maybe write it down and plug the numbers in and solve, or guess. Guess is fine. Just guess. Guess is great. It's great. Everything is fine. Things are fine over here. Yeah. Okay, so homeschooling and grit. How do we balance providing our kids with a differentiated learning journey while also ensuring that they have the grit to excel or succeed or even just get by as adults? What are some of the adult scenarios that require grit? I guess we're thinking situations, a work deadline that isn't flexible, maybe coworkers who are super annoying or always try to take credit or whatever.
Come on. Okay.
Present company excluded most of the time.
I was like, am I the annoying coworker? Yeah.
I mean, come on. We couldn't work together and occasionally be annoyed with each other. I am 100% certain that I am not the only one that is like, OMG, I'm going to kill Megan this week, but I'm not going to send a message about it until I've calmed down. Other things like dealing with rejection, whether that's in the workplace or interpersonal relationships, that is a hard thing to do. And figuring out how to navigate that in a healthy way, right? That requires a pretty significant level of grit. Things like navigating authority, unglamorous tasks, maybe an entry-level job where you have to work your way up to the job that you really want. That's happens a lot. It doesn't really matter how qualified you are. A lot of times you have to prove yourself in an organization to get the job that you really want, sort of thing, especially for younger people. So basically, we're talking about the unsexy, uncomfortable stuff that makes independence possible.
Well, yeah, independence. And I'm thinking little things like staying out of jail because you've completed the very unsexy task of paying your taxes. I mean, I despise not the fact that I have to pay taxes, but the process of the paying of the taxes. Like, just send me a bill. You know what I owe you. Send me a bill. Tell me what I owe you. I will hit the pay now button. I will take care of it. Like, why do I have to do a series of puzzles and riddles to figure out what I owe the IRS? And like, oh, you fucked up, straight to jail. Like, Why? Why do we have to? That's not how it is in like most of the rest of the world, but shocking. That's what we do in the United States. So there you go.
We actually have a really interesting video in our taxation unit study that talks about why it's like that in the US and why there was a decision, a conscious decision to make taxes so much more challenging in the US compared to other places.
Oh, goodness. But differentiated learning, right? We're talking about differentiated learning. We're talking about a teaching framework that is tailored to meet the unique needs, the readiness level, the interests, the learning style of your kid or kiddos. It's the opposite of a one size fits all. Okay. So, is it possible to teach our kids that way and still ensure they can handle the unsexy stuff that life is going to throw at them forever?
I think it's going to be an interesting conversation and likely one of those conversations where we agree in some ways and in other ways, my aggressive academic homeschooling style is really going to come through and your loosey goosey unschooling hippie self is going to be like, yeah, but also totally no.
Yeah, no.
Exactly. So from my perspective, I feel like obviously I want my kid to have the grit necessary to quote unquote hack it in the real world, the adult world. And I'm not sure that anyone is homeschooling and hoping their kids will flounder and flail about as an adult. Even if you are making a conscious decision to remove yourself from, late stage capitalism, I don't think your goal is like, oh, I hope they have no idea what to do with themselves and they constantly feel like they aren't settled and they don't have their feet under them. For me, I think when I'm thinking about differentiated learning, I'm thinking of the kids who aren't succeeding in brick and mortar school because it doesn't interest them or it isn't challenging enough. And so for us, we spend a lot of time in our homeschool making sure that we're almost always pushing up against that challenge point. It takes a lot of effort from me and differentiation of materials and sources, and again, a lot of effort on my part. But for me, that's what differentiation means in our homeschool. So yeah, we'll see how this goes. Now, last week's questions you're afraid to ask episode, it worked pretty well. So we're going to try to do that like rapid fire question thing again this week. Now, that said, again, anyone who listens to us on the regular knows we're very rarely concise and also hardly ever straight to the point. So let's say somewhat rapid fire.
I'm game for somewhat. It's like when you add ish. Like, what time is dinner? 6-ish. I just bought myself a whole bunch of flexibility. I love it.
Exactly. Flexibility. We need flexibility. Okay, real quick, before we dive into this first question, we would just love to ask you to go do a like and a follow on the podcast in general so you never miss a future episode. We would love to welcome you as part of our community, wherever that is, whether it's a podcast listener, you join us on social media or Patreon or whatever. So, okay, here we go. Grit. First question. Is grit always good, or can it slide into unhealthy endurance?
Oh, well. I think as a woman in my mid 40s who was raised in the people pleasing era, there's such this theme on social media right now for those of us who are recognizing how we were taught, whether consciously or subconsciously, to put ourselves last, to burn ourselves into the ground, constantly giving, 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 never saying no. So I do think it's important for kids to learn the difference between persistence and staying driven to accomplish something versus teaching them to ignore their own limits in the name of, I can't give up on something, or I can't quit, or I can't let other people down. So I do think that's important. I think it's important to understand the difference between persistence or fortitude, whatever kind of adjective you want to put in there, and kind of this don't complain, don't quit, don't question. And sometimes I think that's more the mentality in traditional education is we're doing this because we have to do this. We're doing it because this is the way it's been done. And then that carries through into adulthood too. We're doing this because this is the way it's always been done. And so as a hippie unschooler, I'm not about this is the way it's always been done, but why has it always been done that way is more my thing. So I would really rally around the idea that in those instances, in some cases, the gritty thing to do is recognizing that something is not sustainable and doing something different. That also requires grit. It's just not the traditional kind.
Okay. You've got the whole episode to convince people that that's still grit. So I think for me on this specific question, like, yeah, of course, all good things can go too far and become toxic or unhealthy. It's that thing. It always comes up like you need to drink a lot of water, but you can in fact drink too much water. All good things can go too far and become toxic or unhealthy. And I do think that homeschooling especially has the ability to teach that to kids much more than brick and mortar schools. There has to be a lot more structure and a lot fewer opportunities to opt out or tweak or redirect in a brick and mortar school. That makes sense. And so in homeschooling, you have the ability to practice both grit and perseverance, as well as practicing when it's time to reevaluate because it has become toxic or unhealthy.
I like that. There's a balance there. I like
Yeah.
it. Yeah. All right. Next question. Are we valuing grit because it's actually helpful or because capitalism likes compliant workers? You
This is
know I'm going to
Megan
go there.
question if I've ever heard it. Okay.
You know I'm going to be like, this all relates back to end stage capitalism. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. So I'm going to say I don't really think that it's just because of end stage capitalism and compliant workers. I would argue that grit has always been necessary to survival throughout history. If you didn't hunt or gather because it was a bad year and you're like, there's not much out there to get anyway, like you probably didn't survive. And even in a village based society where you could barter with something else, maybe you're the one that makes baskets, you still had to have something to barter with on a regular basis. You couldn't be like, well, I'm the artsy hippie one that doesn't want to make baskets this year, but I'm sure everyone will still feed me and trade with me because I have such a shining personality. I think you've always had to have grit, capitalism or no capitalism.
I didn't feel inspired to make baskets this year. I'm in a creative lull. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So just trade with my shining, sparkling personality. I'm sure it went over very well.
Yeah. No, I can see that. I totally agree with that. In today's world, I feel like a lot of grit is often tied to productivity. So if we weren't an ultra corporate focused capitalistic society, would you still need grit? I think we do. I think you're right. I think we're going to find out at some point as well. And I think we're all going to have to learn how to shift on the fly when this all comes crashing down because it's not going well these days. So I think a lot of times for me, grit feels like how long can you tolerate something uncomfortable without rocking the boat? And our society as a whole, especially since the Industrial Revolution, has been structured so much around systems, organizations first, with people being collateral damage in that sometimes. More so than I would like to see, obviously. I think that many people would like to see. But so part of it makes me wonder if people in the grown-up world who naturally possess more grit, I sometimes wonder if those people gravitate towards lifestyle outcomes that require that level of grit for them. Are those the people that are like, CPAs that are processing more tax returns in April than anybody else and they're making a fortune? Are those the high grit people who naturally have that or who grew up in a home where that's very valued and so it's something that they've cultivated? And then I sometimes wonder, like, people who don't naturally have a lot of grit or maybe grow up in a home where that's not as much of a focus, do they gravitate towards a lifestyle outcome that is not that thing? I mean, I'm in so many groups on social media that are digital nomad groups because that's my visa in Europe here. And you have so many people that are living kind of this dirtbag rich concept where it's like, I make enough money to make sure my bills are covered and put a little away, but then I'm living. right? I'm doing my thing. And so they either, in my mind, have less grit or their grit manifests differently because they're like, I'm not going to get involved in that whole system. It's not for me. Now, I brought up the fact, like maybe in their homes, it was prioritized differently or something like that. The interesting thing for me, I've mentioned before, I'm an only child. So sometimes the way siblings turn out is interesting to me with my own kids because when they were younger, it astounded me that I had to parent my third child very differently than I had to parent the first two when they were toddlers. And I was like, how is that a thing? Because they're all little at the same time. Like they're all being raised in the exact same environment. And I was like, oh, he's like a totally different person. As an only child, it never occurred to me that that would be the case, that they would be so completely different from one another. And so with this grit thing, it's really interesting because among my three kids who are all living in the same environment or being treated the same have different levels of grit. So
Yeah.
it's really interesting to watch that play out where I have one who will be very, very happy to do a dirtbag rich lifestyle and just do his thing. And then I have one who's like, I will take on the world. And then we'll see where the third one lands. So it's interesting.
All right. Next question. Does customization reduce tolerance for discomfort? So, for example, if our kids never have to sit through boring material or work with a teacher that they just don't vibe with, can they complete a career or work related task that just sucks? Or can they work with a terrible boss?
Yeah. I mean, so we unschool, as if you've listened for any period of time, and my kids choose pretty much everything they want to do. And even with that system, I can still think of tons of examples where they've needed to push through challenges and there have been tears and some periods are a real slogfest. I mean, my daughter took a 2-year fashion program, a university level fashion program, and she had one professor for 2 semesters of her 4 semesters. And the first one was okay with this professor. The second one was just chaos, absolute chaos. They weren't following the syllabus. Assignment criteria was nebulous and instructions weren't clear. Due dates weren't clear. And I have a kiddo who does not appreciate that sort of learning environment at all. She was livid. She would leave class every day and be like, and this, and this, and this, when she was super frustrated. But the course overall, the larger objective was something she wanted to achieve. So if she wanted to achieve that thing, she was going to need to move through this person who drove her insane, who was a very talented artist, but oh, she was a lot. She was a lot. I mean, my mathy kiddo, my math and science kiddo, I mean, he loves math and science, but that doesn't mean that in an entire year of geometry, algebra, physics, statistics, he loves every single facet of that thing. I mean, within algebra, he dislikes imaginary numbers, hates imaginary numbers. So every time those roll around, he's like, great, we're back on imaginary numbers. And he has to push through and he has to do stuff he doesn't like. But for us, the key is that the overall objective is or was important to them at the start. So they're determined to get through the roadblock. And I think a lot of this leans into what kind of life we envision for them when we get older. So I had a friend, I can visualize standing in this parking lot having a conversation with this friend who I worked with who was like, well, how are they ever going to get jobs if they're homeschooled? How will they ever function in the real world? And I worked with this friend for many, many, many years. And I was like, we hate our jobs. We literally hate our jobs. We bring breakfast to work. We sit in Amy's office every morning, and one of us is always crying. We eat breakfast. We try to hatch an escape plan out of this place. And I'm like, so this isn't really what I'm hoping for, actually. I don't want my kids to grow up and be miserable. I want them to grow up and do something where, yeah, they don't enjoy every single minute of every single day, kind of like the examples that I just gave, but overall, the overall thing they like. And so for us, we can apply our grit, but hopefully the overall thing is still something enjoyable or aligned with your overall goals. Hopefully.
Okay, so I guess I think that we do a disservice to our kids if they only ever come across challenges in things that they ultimately want. Like, I think I want to succeed or achieve the end goal, so I'll struggle through this disappointment to get there, just isn't the same as I really don't want to go to jail, so I guess I'll waste my weekend doing taxes. I just feel like they're like two totally different scenarios, and the motivation behind them are totally different. So if you never practice the like, I don't want this negative consequence, it's just like super unlikely that I'll even be the one that gets audited and goes to jail, but I'll still waste my time doing my taxes. Are they going to waste their time doing their tax? I don't know. I mean, yeah, I think that we need to specifically provide opportunities for discomfort and slog for our kiddos. And I think that's true across the board, not just in brick and mortar schools. I think if you have a kiddo in a brick and mortar school, you have to provide those opportunities for discomfort and slog in the real world and interpersonal relationships and taking care of stuff outside of school, because they're going to leave school behind at some point and they need to know that they also have to get through the slog. But because our homeschooled kiddos don't have the inevitable slog of brick and mortar school, I think we have to do it extra for our homeschooled kiddos.
And I was laughing really hard when you were like, what are the odds that I'm going to be the one to get audited? And I'm like, oh no, they've been raised with a mother who has raging anxiety. I am like, for sure you're getting audited and 100% you will go to jail. I was talking to my brother-in-law about something because my husband is always like the it'll be fine guy. And I was like, not only will it not be fine, but I will tell you in glorious detail the 700 ways this can go wrong. They have definitely been raised with the consequences of their actions if they have not followed through. Because I'm like, I will tell you how bad this can get. I will tell you the worst case scenario that comes if you drop the ball on this thing, because that's where my brain goes. And that's why my teeth hurt. Okay. All right. So next question, real quick before we do the next question. Amanda mentioned at the onset that this is a topic that kind of spawned from our book club discussion. Our book club meets every other week on Monday afternoon/evening, depending on where you are in the world. It is literally as low as $4 a meeting. We will drop a link in the show notes below if you'd like to join us, and we will put a coupon code. It's super casual. If you don't even read the book, I think last week we were at like a 50-50. Like half the people had read the book, half the people hadn't. Doesn't matter. We don't judge. People come. People show up on the sidelines of a soccer field. They show up folding laundry, nursing a baby, hair in a messy bun, like does not matter. So come join us, have some fun, no pressure, no stress, but it's a much bigger version of these types of conversations.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. Are there things you're doing in your homeschool life now that would prepare your child for deadlines they didn't choose, authority they didn't opt into, or feedback that isn't gentle? Oh, this is not going to go well for me. What do you think, Amanda?
I mean, yeah, in our home, 100%. And this is going to be one of those big differences. I require that my kiddo is basically always in some sort of weekly in-person lesson where he has to deal with feedback from a coach that isn't me, and not just the really gentle kind of feedback. He also has to regularly take a class with feedback or graded work from someone, not me. And we're not talking Megan's really gentle book club that he absolutely loved. Like, it was great, and I'm happy that he had that. But he also had one where he was getting grades, or he was getting feedback of like, next time you need to do this, this, and this to improve this writing. I don't think his whole homeschool experience needs to involve grades or constructive criticism. We've talked about that before on the shows. I'm not big on that, but I do think that he will run into that in the real world, especially based on what he has expressed interest in so far. And since I personally am not really comfortable providing that type of feedback, I make sure that it comes from somewhere else. Now, that said, I do, even when it's not gentle, I make sure it's healthy feedback. We're not talking about the toxic, negative feedback from my mother-in-law here. It still has to be generally healthy, constructive criticism.
Yeah, so we have a little bit of this going on, right? We do have deadlines because my kids do take quite a bit of external classes that they have chosen. And I have two, much more so than the third, who I have previously described will probably take a very different path when it comes to grit. Two of my three will not let a deadline pass. They want the grade, and they want the grade to be good. It was funny because looked into Prisma online learning for my youngest kid at one point, and they have this thing where you present your work and then you explain what sort of grade you think you deserve. And he was like, absolutely not. He was like, that is way too ambiguous. I want a grade. I want it to come from someone else. He doesn't want a grade on all things, but if there is a grading situation happening, he certainly doesn't want to be the one to explain what he thinks he deserves and why. He's like, that's not how this works. So
I can just imagine him turning to you and being like, what kind of hippy dippy bullshit is this?
exactly.
Without the bullshit, because it's not allowed in your home. Like my kid would be like, what the fuck is this? And
I was cooking the other day and I had something on my phone while I was cutting up chicken and whatever. And it was that guy, Dr. Mike, who will like have people come on and he'll answer questions. And he walked into the room and he goes, oh, this guy. And I go, oh, you don't like Dr. Mike? And he goes, he's too nice to all these stupid people that come on. He's like, they're so dumb and he's so nice to them. So yeah, he would not put up with that. So, but I will say our external teachers are all hand selected. They get to choose their teachers. Now, again, in the program that my daughter took, where she signed up for 2 full years, she didn't know who she was going to have for all 2 years. But on OutSchool, we do. I talked a couple of episodes ago about how we used winter break to kind of trial new teachers. I set up some one-on-ones so that Liam could go meet some of these teachers, get a feel for their communication style, et cetera, before he decided if he was going to opt in. But I will say, in a few minutes, we're going to talk about how neurodivergence plays into some of these things. And so that's my caveat to not having the not gentle feedback here. I'm rolling with that. So authority that they didn't opt into is also typically less often, but they still have to deal with people that they don't necessarily enjoy. My daughter is in an artists collective where she has studio space that she works out of, and there's a bunch of others. And she has a very direct, maybe we'll say, neighbor, opinionated, forceful, hard to say, right? There's a lot of words. She's very nice. She's not a bad person. She's just a lot. And so like they do have to deal with that. My boys both play, I've talked about it a lot. My boys both play Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh, which is a neurodivergent haven of individuals. So you're getting a lot of quirks in there and a lot of peccadillos from other people that might be like, and you just kind of have to work through that and whatnot. So it's there, but it's probably nowhere near to the level of Amanda's there. And for now, I'm okay with that. We'll see. Maybe I'll totally regret it later and I'll tell you all the reasons why it was a mistake. But for now, I'm good. Oh, goodness. Okay, we have a couple more questions to tackle. Before we get to that, I want to circle back to what Amanda said before about our unit on taxes. If you are not aware, we put out units. We put out one a month. They are multidisciplinary. They have activities for ages K through 12, even younger than K, really. We've got toddler activities in some of them. So if you're homeschooling different ages, they work great. Even if you're homeschooling one kiddo and you have a kindergartner, you can use it now. You can use it again in 3 years. You can use it again in middle school. You can use it again in high school. You can just keep going back because we've stacked everything where you can start at the soft introduction level and the age appropriate activities level. And then as your kid matures and develops and grows and you're ready to layer on heavier aspects of content, more detailed content, you can keep using that same unit over and over again. And the activities get more and more in depth and the resources become more and more mature as they age. So they include something for everyone. There's math, there's writing, there's art, there's cooking. I mean, they're all different, but there's always a whole bunch of types of activities in there. I will say we're recording this on January 15th of 2026. If you go into our Teachers Pay Teachers account, it is one long string of sales on our unit called How Democracies Fall. And that's basically what we're living through. So if you're struggling right now to figure out how to explain what's happening in the world right now to your children, it's a good unit. And yes, we somehow managed to find resources for 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds that explain the rise of Hitler and the rise of Trump and how they parallel to one another, but in a way that is so veiled and so subtle and so age appropriate that you'll be planting some of those seeds that you can harvest over time as they get older. So if you're trying to figure out some of those things and maybe history isn't your jam or you're just not sure how to bring it up, we've got you covered. So check the show notes for the link. it's there. But there's a ton of other units. There's units on taxes, conservation, Japanese internment, D-Day. Oh my gosh, women in medicine, you name it, it's there. There's tons and tons. The New York City subway system, if you have a train lover. Potatoes. We have a unit study on potatoes. Potatoes have shaped civilization far more than most people realize. So unbelievable. So yeah, anyway, back to questions.
Yes. All right. So our next question, on a scale of if it's hard, we redesign it, to if it's hard, we try again, where do you think you fall?
Oh my gosh, I think for us, it's super situational dependent. That's such a wishy-washy answer, but it's true. We do tend to redesign because I'm not a huge fan of banging our heads against the wall because we have to finish something the way we started it. If there's a way that becomes clear to us that's simpler, more straightforward, and we can get the same outcome. And I do think, again, going back to what I said earlier, I do think that there's a lot of grit, maybe not in the traditional sense, but in critical thinking, systems, and logic knowledge that comes from making that shift. But to your point, I do have kids who pay taxes. All of my kids have been entrepreneurial, so they do have to pay taxes. They can't shift and redesign paying taxes. When we lived in South Carolina, the system for paying state tax, it was so dysfunctional, I can't even tell you. We just had to figure it out. We had to put our heads together, figure it out. We had to call the number more times than I can tell you. So wherever possible, I think we redesign because that just seems like the smart thing to do. But if you can't, yeah, you have to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that makes sense. I'm a little surprised that you're not more like we redesign basically everything.
I mean, I feel that the South Carolina sales tax system should be redesigned, but no one was asking me for that feedback. So in that case, we just had to figure it out. Otherwise, she couldn't renew her business license, which means she couldn't participate in the farmer's market. It's a whole chain reaction of like, we just have to figure this out kind of thing. But wherever we can, I think it just makes sense to redesign where you can.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think for me, I'm somewhere in the middle on this spectrum. So for the most part, if it's hard, but there's an obvious, easy way to tweak it and make it more enjoyable for everyone, we're going to go that route. But there are absolutely things that are non-negotiables in our homeschool life. And we can maybe find the best option out of all of the options that he hates, but he's still going to do it for the agreed upon amount of time. For us, that looks like things like a year of cursive instruction. It looks like consistent typing instruction every year, year after year. He hates it. I'm sorry that you hate it. You're still going to practice typing. Here are the typing curriculums that we can use. Pick whichever one. I know you still hate typing. You're still going to pick one and you're going to do it 3 times a week, every week, forever. Thank you very much. Music instruction kind of falls under that as well. I talked recently, actually, maybe it was in the book club, not during a recording, but I was saying I just told my kiddo, like, he's been learning how to read music and learning notes and things like that for quite a while. And I expect 1 year of committed instrument learning during his middle school time. And so he needs to be deciding what instrument he's going to do. And he has to get committing because it's got to be a full year before he starts any kind of high school stuff. That's just how it's going to be. And for us, even things like golf and snowboarding, not my kid's favorite. He does not really enjoy those things. But for him, they are the lesser of all evils in his mind. And I expect him to work on them, and he will continue to work on them because that's how it works in our home. So, yeah.
Because grit. Yeah.
Yep. Grit and perseverance.
There you go. All right. Next question. How do you and your child/children determine the difference between this is hard and worth doing or this is hard and unnecessary? So it's a little bit of a twist on the last one, but slightly different. Hard and worth doing versus hard and unnecessary.
So, anyone who knows me will not at all be surprised by this. But for us, it is usually based on some sort of research study that I have read and the importance of X. or the reasons that why is useful in the long run. If there's some kind of peer reviewed research out there that's talking about the importance of doing this, or the ways in which music education helps with overall critical thinking and processing later in life, or yada, 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 those kinds of things I'm going to bring to the table and be like, this is why I think that this is important, and this is why I think we should do this. We might have a conversation about it, and he's always welcome to argue and negotiate. Unfortunately, he has a mother who's a very good debater, so it's unusual for him to win the debate, but occasionally he wins. We definitely have a give and take and back and forth, and usually he understands where I'm coming from. It works well for us because his mind works in a similar way, and so if I can provide peer-reviewed research that says this is valuable, he's usually like, okay. I'm like, all right, I see it. Though I will say that sometimes it's more personal. I think I've talked about this before, but when I was growing up, I saw my very working class dad struggle quite a bit when he moved into middle management. He struggled because he never learned how to play golf. And he felt like he got left out of a lot of important decisions and a lot of important discussions because he wasn't on the golf course with the rest of the middle management and upper management team because he couldn't go out and play a competent game of golf. And so my kiddo is becoming proficient in golf at a young age so that he can pick it up as an adult if needed, if he finds himself in that position. And that just is one of those things that comes back to those differences in how I was raised and the advantages we had and we didn't have, and trying to just help prepare him for those adult situations that are going to come up. My husband has to go play golf occasionally, and it's the same kind of thing. He's not particularly good, but he did learn at a much younger age, and so he can do it now in his 40s and 50s. And I just want that for my kiddo.
Okay, I was laughing because earlier when you were like, I'm going to have him do your music. And in my head, I was like, well, that's good because exposure is the key to everything. How do you know what you love unless you've had exposure? And I was thinking that could totally be his thing where maybe he starts
Oh,
with
it's
like the
not.
clarinet, but
It's
then
not.
I'm like, he might choose the clarinet and be like, well, this isn't my thing, but it turns out I really love the musicality of it. I'm going to take up the violin, and he's going to explore all these different avenues. And then you were like, because I read a study about critical thinking skills, and I was like, oh, okay, she went in a very different direction than I did with that. So
She did, because her kiddo does not enjoy. I mean, like when he was at Montessori school in kindergarten, they had piano there, and the kids were supposed to learn piano, and then you could sign them up for additional piano lessons after school. And he came to me and was like, please do not make me learn piano. Do not make me learn how to play piano. And I was like, okay, you don't have to learn piano. At some point, you're going to learn something. But in kindergarten, you don't have to learn piano.
So this typically isn't a conversation for us. I know you're going to be shocked because they've chosen the task, the class, the goal. And so usually they're determined to get to it on their own. If they're super frustrated about something, they'll usually come to me and bounce ideas off of me. We'll talk through potential solutions to whatever it is, potential alternatives. If they choose to shift or abandon a task, I typically trust their judgment because it's not a very frequent scenario. They usually are pretty stick-to-itiveness kind of humans. Beyond that, I think really my questions are just, is there a payoff? Is this building a skill, or is it just checking a box? Are we sticking with it because I paid for it or because we feel like we have to stick to it or something like that? And then kind of looking at like the struggle factor, like how long is this struggle factor going to be? Is this something that's temporary that you can get through, or is this going to be a chronic issue? Because if it's a chronic issue, then we really probably do need to change something. I mean, even as an adult, like you can't chronically be miserable at your job forever and have a healthy life. So something's going to need to change there. I'm not saying quit your job today and then you can't pay rent. And so you find another job, but making a plan that something has to change long term would be the healthy solution there. So that's pretty much where I would land.
Okay. All right. So I think we've got just a couple more questions. Next one. We never cover a topic without looking at it from different perspectives. So when it comes to homeschooling neurodivergent kids, I can see we're asking them to kind of quote unquote push through could be harmful instead of character building. Where do you think the line is between supporting a kid's nervous system and their authentic self without inadvertently reinforcing avoidance or causing harm?
So, straight up, I'm going to close my bedroom door before I answer this question. Okay. Okay. Door closed. Neurodivergent kiddo usually has noise canceling headphones on. So, between closed door and noise canceling headphones, I think we're good. And genuinely, it's not something that I wouldn't say to him. Okay. So, for neurodivergent kids, yeah, I think pushing through can cross into harm pretty fast. I've talked before about my oldest kiddo in the public school system, and he was managing it. He was surviving, but it wasn't good. I think it's important for us to note that discomfort and dysregulation are not the same thing. And I think a lot of times people who are new to the world of neurodivergence or haven't necessarily had the opportunity yet to go deep, deep, deep into neurodivergence and what that looks like and how their kiddo moves through the world and experiences the world might not necessarily realize that, because the number of posts that I see about kids misbehaving or being this or being that and whatever, it's like, that's dysregulation. Most of the time, that's dysregulation. And so when we can figure out what is causing that dysregulation, we have to, because that's not discomfort. That's a very different thing. That's not pushing through and developing grit in my world. I have 3 neurodivergent kids, so my fuse is pretty short on this one. I will go mama bear on your ass pretty quickly if something is not neurodivergent affirming. So the line for me is whether my kid feels supported while being challenged. I'm not averse to challenge as long as it's not dysregulation. Discomfort, fine. Dysregulation, no. Challenge is good, but that they have to be supported in that approach. Because if your child's nervous system is completely overwhelmed, you're not building grit. You're just frying your child's nervous system. And it's not going to do good things in the long run. So, some of the things that I talked about earlier about like not gentle feedback and things like that. I mean, I have one child in mind when I say that, and he's neurodivergent as hell. And that is what it is. And his entry into the adult world or the world at large is going to be different anyway, because he experiences the world very differently. And there was a conversation taking place today in a Facebook group about kids writing letters backwards. And I was like, yeah, I have a 14-year-old that writes letters and numbers backwards. And he's brilliant, but he still writes letters and numbers backwards. There's always going to be things that make him different, that require accommodation in the real world. And so when I'm educating him and raising him, that's just going to have to carry through. He's not magically going to be a different person at 18 who can now all of a sudden handle these things that he can't handle today. He'll evolve, as all human beings do. His needs might be different. They might be slightly more, they might be slightly less, but he's always going to need accommodation in the world. And so I'm okay with that. He's going to find an environment as an adult that's going to support that, because nothing else is going to work long term for him. And I'll help him find it if he needs help.
Okay. I think it's interesting because my answer to this question is going to be less than helpful. And I think it's in the same way that that conversation, I saw the same one about writing the letters backwards, because that was one of the big indicators for me with my kiddo. That was one of the many things, but one of the bigger ones that was like, there's something going on here, and we
Yeah.
definitely need to go get a diagnosis and find someone who will take us seriously and help us figure out what's going on. And it becomes that question of like, well, there's a difference between acknowledging that it's a problem and deciding that it can't continue. I wanted to acknowledge that it was a problem and understand what was going on and figure out the best way to work with my kiddo. But it wasn't like, we have to find a way to make sure that he never writes his letters backwards again. Those are two very different responses to the same concern. And so for me, that's kind of the same with this. I think pushing through needs to be a healthy effort at building endurance and perseverance. If it's unhealthy, if it's toxic, it isn't doing that. It's not healthy. But I think that also requires that you have a really solid understanding of and relationship with your kiddo. There's a difference between a task that always causes dysregulation and meltdowns and the occasional, like, hormonal tears due to disappointment and frustration. And you need to know your kiddo well enough and the situation with your kid enough to the situation with your kiddo enough to be able to say, this is causing consistent dysregulation. We need to change that. And occasional hormonal tears. I say this because we're in the throes of puberty. Like, it is a type of dysregulation, but we also need to work on how we work with that and through that and move past it without just removing the disappointment or the frustration.
Mhm.
And that requires a lot on you because you don't already have enough going on as the parent or caregiver. You've got nothing, no invisible labor. Everything's easy. You're not doing all of the heavy lifting. It's all good. No problem. Just take something else on.
Exactly. Oh, goodness. I just have to say, I mentioned at the top of the episode, my kiddo went to Canada yesterday. So I just got a text from him. I had texted him a little while ago, like, how's it going? Whatever. And he said he just got back from playing in the snow. I'm like, ah. So I replied back, I'm like, Pixar, it didn't happen. I can guarantee you he didn't take any pictures, but I would love to see. I'm like, I want to see snow.
Maybe he'll at least go back out. He has real
Yeah.
shoes this time, right? It wasn't just
Yeah,
sandals.
he didn't wear flip-flops, thank
Okay.
God. He didn't take gloves, though. We looked at the weather forecast, snow every single day. I'm like, you should probably bring gloves. I have a whole travel bin with like hats, gloves, whatever. I'm like, do you have gloves? No, I'm good. I'm like, okay. So, he's going to be 18 tomorrow. Like, okay. Okay. It'll build some grit when his fingers are frozen. Okay. So, all right. Last question. Continuing with our theme of different perspectives here. Okay. We would be remiss if we didn't ask ourselves how much of this conversation is shaped by privilege. Who actually gets the option to opt out of discomfort? Or put differently, does having a safety net change how much grit a kid needs or how much risk they can take?
So yeah, I get to go first. So remember, we are unfiltered here. So yeah, look, I think the more money you have, especially family legacy money, the easier it is to be like, we opt out of the system as it is. And to know that your kid will be fine, even if they never figure out how to fit into the larger society. If your child didn't have the family money, your family doesn't have a family history of financial stability, it's a lot easier to worry about whether or not your child will be able to support themselves as an adult, right? Will they be able to put a roof over their head, afford health insurance, not crumble under the weight of student loans, et cetera, et cetera? This question reminds me, I saw a video on social media. Apparently there's this couple that does like privilege meals or something, and they're always like, oh, let me see your privilege meal. And the one that I saw, she was like, this is spaghetti with my mom's homemade turkey meatballs. And all of these people under it were like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, I grew up poor, we always had spaghetti and meatballs. And I was like, man, I remember the days of having to buy the 25-cent can of just tomato sauce and seasoning it with all of the herbs because we couldn't afford actual pasta sauce. We definitely were not buying the meat to make homemade turkey meatballs. That just was not in the freaking budget. And a lot of people don't understand that level. And I think when you're coming into life with that life experience, that lived experience, it's a lot harder to be like, hey, you don't need to be able to fit in the real world. It'll be okay. Because you're like, man, I remember going hungry because there was not enough, like I had to choose between electricity and food this week. And so we cut back on the food to make sure that we still had the electricity. That was the trade-off there. Or, I couldn't afford a car, so we only had public transit. And even then, there were times I rode public transit and hope no one noticed that I didn't pay because I didn't have the money to pay for it, but I had to get to my job if I had any chance of ever being able to pay for it. So yeah, there's a lot of privilege wrapped up in being able to say, like, we opt out of the system as it is, late stage capitalism or not.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. I mean, it is without a doubt a privilege to have the option to make changes. I mean, hello, my family just at the threat of Donald Trump becoming president, we were like, we're out. I mean, we picked up and moved to Europe, and that is not accessible or attainable for so many people. I talked to a friend who is a Black mother in Virginia, and she would love nothing more than to leave, but their family isn't able to pull together the money to purchase passports for their kids. And that is the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the amount of paperwork and fees and all of
Yeah.
this that you're going to need. So 100% we are beyond privileged. Not everybody gets to redesign their education or craft an adult life that minimizes hard things or discomfort. Completely acknowledge that. I hand select my children's teachers, and I have the privilege of doing that. And not everyone has that. A lot of people don't have that. So there's no doubt in my mind that a safety net allows kids to take healthy risks. I was raised very differently than Amanda. I've always had a safety net, always. And so, yeah. Are you curious how I ended up a giant hippie who's like, it'll all work out? Well, actually, I do say things are going to be terrible all the time. I'm an odd mix of like, everything's going to go wrong and throw caution to the wind and trust the process. I'm a really odd dynamic of those two things. But I can't deny, to your point about legacy and all of that, my children are also equally incredibly privileged. It doesn't mean that I swim in a bathtub of money like Scrooge McDuck in the opening of DuckTales.
Could you
But
imagine with your anxiety and the germs on money,
oh
like even trying to make those two things happen?
I would die. So I think it becomes incumbent upon us to raise kids who understand that their flexibility is not universal, to ensure that our kids can navigate hard situations themselves, but also reserve the empathy for kids who can't or adults who can't in their later life, because that's what's missing right now.
Yeah.
But while I can't necessarily understand through lived experience some of the things that we talk about, I will say that I lived in survival mode for a number of years when my husband had cancer. Not necessarily financial survival mode, although we were very careful, because let me tell you, I am not supporting my life on the homeschool mom's unfiltered empire of money. Okay. Like that is not what's keeping us afloat in life. Okay.
Could
So
you
when my husband
imagine?
had cancer,
Could you imagine trying to live off the $26 I made last month?
right? I know.
No.
Yeah. So when he was sick, there was a long-term financial, oh my gosh, but more than anything, it was survival mode. It was trying to get through hour by hour, day by day, keep him alive, keep the kids okay, try not to let them be too traumatized by everything that's going on. It was a really, really tough fight. And what I came away from that was knowing that when you are functioning in survival mode, it is almost impossible to see long-term options. It's almost impossible to make really well-defined, balanced, informed choices, because at least for me, my thought process was so dysregulated to be able to make decisions, to think, to put together coherent thoughts, to do any of those things. And I only operated for survival mode on a handful of years. There are people who've lived their entire life in survival mode. And so when people say like, well, why don't they do this or why don't they do that? It's so hard when you're in survival mode to do those things. And so we just definitely wanted to make sure we acknowledge that, because it is not easy. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
for sure.
All right. So mantra for the day. Let's wrap this up. Personalization doesn't have to eliminate challenge. It gives us the power to choose which challenges actually matter. When we use flexibility thoughtfully, we raise kids who can persevere and think critically about what's worth pushing through.
Yeah. And that's
Yeah.
it. You don't have to eliminate challenge, but we want them to be able to push through with critical thinking these days. Critical thinking and empathy. The whole world needs so much more of both.
Whew.
Let's do our
Yeah,
best in our homeschool to make sure that that's happening.
exactly. All right, friends, we will catch you next week. Happy homeschooling.
Yeah, have a great one.